Hi, my name is Gerard. Here at Numa, we've been busy with a series on leadership, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about organizational leadership. If you're interested in leadership, if you feel called to leadership, I would strongly advise you to go and have a look at Numa on social media. You can go and have a look at our website and pick up on where we're at in this series, because this piece of teaching that I'm going to do today really ties into a broader conversation of what Christian leadership looks like and what a call to leadership looks like. Today I'm going to focus on organizational leadership. What does it mean and what does it look like to lead larger organizations? And I just want to start that with a brief introduction of myself. I've, for the last 20 years of my life, been involved in leadership of organizations in some capacity, as a director to an architectural consultancy, as then owner of an architectural consultancy, in leadership in the Urban Design Institute of South Africa, leadership in ministry, and specifically at a ministry school. And now I head up a NGO, a non-profit organization providing architectural services to the development sector. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what does organizational leadership look like, and specifically asking myself the question, is there a biblical model of organizational leadership? There is so much available in the media, so much available writing available on organizational leadership. But for me, a core question is, has the Bible given us a good model to understand what organizational leadership looks like? And I think the Bible does two things. Firstly, there are incredible models of leadership where we see, or modelers, I should say, of leadership, where we see people living out leadership, and we get to look at their stories, we get to look at how they did things and glean from that. But I actually also think that the Bible puts forward a model of how leadership teams can and should be put together. And I want to take us to that today, and I want to take us through what I believe is one of the key scriptures in the New Testament that looks at what a biblical leadership model looks like. How should we be leading when we are given the opportunity to lead organizations? And I want to take you to Ephesians 4, verse 1 to 16. I'm going to dive straight in, so please stay with me if you want to look that up. It's Ephesians 4, verse 1 to 16. I'm reading from the ESV, the English Standard Version of the Bible. It's quite a long passage, so stay with me. Have some grace with me if I stumble over the reading, but I'm going to try and do this with you as well as we can. So here we go. I, therefore, a prisoner, and this is the Apostle Paul speaking, and he's saying, I, therefore, as a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope which belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. I'm going to skip a couple of verses, because there's a slightly confusing piece here that I would really encourage you to study, but is going to sidetrack us for a moment. So I'm going to skip to verse 11. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to adulthood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way in him who is the head, into Christ, for whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. Wow, a mouthful. What I'm going to do for us is I'm going to try and unpack this piece by piece. The core of these verses speaks of a very specific model of 5 types of leadership that work in unity, that work in unison, and we're going to get to that, but let's try and unpack this passage piece by piece. And the first thing that this passage speaks of is this concept of calling. It in fact mentions it a number of times in the passage, this understanding that every Christian has a calling. Now you may go, oh, hang on, Gerard, I'm not called to be a pastor, I'm not called to be church leader. Do I even have a calling? I want to put it to you that every Christian has a calling, that you have been called by God. He has called you firstly and foremost to step back into relationship with Him, to be His child, to be a co-laborer with Christ. So it's this incredible calling back into relationship, but then also a calling into purpose. The Bible speaks of that God created good works for us to do even before the beginning of time. He has a plan for us. He has a purpose for our lives. And we have this choice. Do I pursue? Do I step into the calling that God has for me? Now, I'm a frank person. I want to say to you, I don't believe that every single last person is called to senior leadership. That is a specific calling and a specific purpose. But I do believe that every last Christian is called to lead in certain areas of their lives. And it's really important for us to have the humility to understand what am I called to, but also to understand that we have seasons in our lives. And you may not currently look at yourself and go, well, I'm a leader. But that doesn't mean that God isn't leading you to a place where He does ask of you and does call you into leading in a senior manner, potentially even leading a large organization. And I would encourage you not to self-determine that, but to really have that as something that you put in the hands of He who calls, the one who calls us and knows us best. And what goes really strongly with a sense of calling is a sense of humility that verse 2 speaks of. With all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. It's this picture of the calling even into leadership being one where we are called to be humble. We're called to servant-heartedness. And that's one of the things I mentioned earlier, how there are these beautiful examples of leaders in Scripture. And for me, Jesus always stands out. He has to stand out. And His incredible humility, despite His incredible stature and skill and knowledge and power. God made flesh, but He leads with such humility and with such patience. For 30 years of His life, He waits until the time is right. And then after that, these verses place such a strong emphasis on unity. In fact, Jesus spoke of unity as one of the key things that distinguish us as Christians. Jesus said, by this, people will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another, that you walk in unity and in love with one another. And that's one of the key callings of leadership, is those who bring unity. Then in verse 7, very importantly, it speaks of 2 aspects. It speaks of this idea of gifting, but gifting being from God. It speaks of Christ's gift. It speaks of that we are made differently. We are made with purpose. We're made with skill, and that we are gifted differently, each one of us. And the difference is both in the types of giftings that we have, the areas that we're gifted in, but it also speaks of a measure of gifting. So it speaks of that some people are gifted more than others, and that doesn't mean that they are more valuable than others. It means that we're gifted in different areas. And that's something that's so important for us to understand, is to understand how far along am I? and to be sober and to be honest about that, to be humble about that, but at the same time, to acknowledge and understand what God has placed in us and that we are called to fully develop and grow in those things. So know the measure to which you've been gifted. Know what you've called to grow in. And then very, very importantly, and this is one of the crux pieces of the scripture, it speaks of Jesus giving the leaders to the church. It's this understanding that to be a leader means that I am a gift. I am a servant. I am one given to the church. I'm, in a sense, I don't belong to myself anymore. It's like when you receive a gift, the gift doesn't belong to itself. The gift belongs to the receiver. And we're like that in leadership. We become a gift to the organizations that we lead, whether that's in the church, or whether that is in the corporate world, whether that's in the non-profit sector. Leaders are called to be gifts to the organizations that they lead, not to be served by, but to serve. And then we get into the heart of what I described as what I believe is one of the most core pieces of biblical teaching around leadership models, where the passage speaks of what many refer to as the fivefold ministry or fivefold leadership model. And it speaks of the apostle, it speaks of the prophet, evangelist, shepherd, and teacher. And these different roles, if you like, or different positions, describe different kinds of people. Describes the different kinds of people that organizations need to run successfully. I'm going to unpack it a little bit for you, but before I do, just some contextual comments. It speaks of this understanding of leadership team, that it's not an individual, but that there are different types of people and that they're all necessary and that they each have their role. In my experience in organizational leaderships, I have seen people in key positions in leadership with each one of these giftings. And the passage obviously used Christian words to describe these, but I believe that the characteristics and the leadership type is as applicable to a secular setting as it is to the church. Because inherently these different names, these different descriptors speak of people who make a very specific contribution to the organization. So firstly, let's unpack that a little bit. We start with the apostle. Now, what is an apostle? What is the role of an apostle? The word simply means sent one. So the first apostles, of course, were Jesus' followers, the ones he had called. And I love the description of how this happened. You know, with so many of them, Jesus was walking and he would meet someone for the first time and start a conversation with them and then call them. And then he went through this incredible process of walking with them for 3 years of his life, training them, teaching them, living with them, life on life. And they were known as the first apostles, because inherently their role, Jesus was preparing them to send them out. An apostle is a pioneer, he's a planter, is a person of vision. If we look in the Bible of the key apostles and their efforts to establish and build the church, it was clear that Jesus gave them such a strong vision of his hope and salvation for the world. He gave them such a strong vision for how this should happen. Beautiful answer to the plight of humanity, both in an understanding of the gospel and the mode of bringing it to people. So apostles are people of vision. And very interestingly, if you read the research on what followers look for in leaders, people with vision is one of the key characteristics that followers want. So if you're asking yourself, well, if I want to be the kind of leader that has willing followers, people who would like to follow me, would like to be a part of what I'm busy with, do you have vision? Are you somebody that can describe that vision? Are you somebody that can bring others along to that vision? And very importantly, where does that vision come from? What birthed that vision in you? Is that something that is just your great idea? Or is it something that has a deeper meaning, a deeper purpose, that has been formed before you even walked the earth? To me, that's the most incredible aspect of the sense of calling, the sense of understanding that God had prepared good works for me before the beginning of time, is this understanding that I'm stepping into something that already has momentum, already has so much meaning and so much purpose. And as somebody who has pioneered organizations, this feeling of that, but it's not just me. So having vision does not mean that you're alone. Doesn't mean that you're forging ahead in front of everybody else. Sometimes that means that you really deeply understand how you are coming along and coming alongside others. So in organizational leadership, we wouldn't speak of the apostle, we would speak of the visionary. We would speak of the pioneer. We would speak of the entrepreneur, somebody who has the natural inclination to want to break new ground, to move into new things. Maybe you look at yourself and you recognize your willingness to take risks. Maybe you look at yourself and you recognize your desire to do something new that hasn't been done before. Maybe you recognize this idea of, I want to establish something that has meaning and purpose. Maybe that speaks of that God is starting to speak to you about a role where you are a planter of new things. Then the second, where you'll go like, Gerard, is this relevant to secular organizations? Absolutely, yes it is the role of the prophet. Now, many church movements, in fact, have moved away from the phrase prophet because it has been corrupted and has been used inappropriately so much. But let me demystify prophet for you for a moment. What it means to be a prophet very simply means that you're a really good listener. And you're a really good listener listening to the Lord. And you're somebody who steps into the role of humbly and with grace for others and for yourself, seeks to speak what God wants to speak. And the core of what I believe the role of a prophet is, and where you'll see the link in the corporate environment for larger organizations, in the non-profit environment, is that the key role of the prophet is to find the gold in people and call it forth. It is looking at your people through God's eyes, looking at your people and seeing what He sees, seeing the potential that others have not recognized, hearing from the Lord what He would like to whisper to them, telling them about their value, telling them about their potential, but then also walking a road with them to see that fulfilled and keeping them motivated to grow and develop themselves into what God is calling them into. Being prepared to intercede for others. And I think too often when we step out of the church environment, we step out of these really important parts that we see as part of the church and part of the church movement. And leaders are called to find the gold in people who don't even know it's there themselves yet. Leaders are called to focus on preparing people and preparing them well, making sure when you advance others, seeking to advance them firstly, but when you advance them, that you are directly involved in their preparedness, in their readiness to move on. Then the third role is the evangelist. That's the mouthpiece of the gospel. It's somebody who can't remain silent. It's that person that is so excited that he wants to win everybody else over because he so deeply believes in the thing that he's grabbed a hold of. It sounds a bit like a salesman. Yes, it is. And yes, you get fantastic leaders who are incredible salesmen because they are often the ones, even if it isn't their own vision, even if the vision has come from someone else, who can really galvanize others around that vision. And that is so necessary in leadership, someone who can get the troops excited about what we're doing, who really has that capacity to energize the room and energize those around them. And that's what we're called to do in our faith, to be so excited about our relationship with God that we can't help tell people about it. But also in business, that is so important, that you have people in organizations that can really ensure that people inside and outside of the organization is deeply excited about what the organization does. And then the shepherd, or the pastor, if you like. It is what it sounds like. It is the carer of the sheep. It is the person who cares deeply about his people. It's the one who's prepared to bind the wounds. That's a very, very important part of being a shepherd, being a carer, is that you're the guy that binds the wounds. But as important is we don't want people to remain in a wounded state. It is that one that it is the person who will take people from woundedness to wholeness, who'd walk that road with them, who's prepared to get personal, who's prepared to get into people's faces, who's prepared to go to people who they see as struggling and say, what's happening? How can we come alongside you? It's not the doing for others, it's the doing with others to ensure their wholeness. It's a discipler, a caregiver. So often in organizations, that is something that is sorely, sorely lacking. In the church, we see that as important, we see that as a key role. But if you're in an organization and you want to ensure the long-term sustainability of that organization, the key thing is your people and caring for your people. This is such a crucial role. And then the last position that is mentioned, and I'm going to talk about why I'm calling it a position in a moment, is that of teacher, the subject master. It is the one that really knows. And that's one of the other characteristics, again, if you read research on what people look for in their leaders. High degree of competency, but also the ability to transfer those skills. It's great to be fantastic, to be the best at what you do. But if you can't transfer those skills, you may be excellent, but you're not a leader. Because the role of leadership is the equipping of your people, the growing of your people, the enabling of your people, who are the ones who really do the job. That's one of the great things of a leader, being a leader, especially in senior leadership, is you have all these amazing people who are doing the real thing, and you get to be their champion, and you get to be their carer, and you get to be the person who's enabling and training and teaching them to fulfill that role. So the shepherd is the discipler, the one who's prepared to get deep and personal. The teacher is the mentor, who's prepared to still walk alongside, but is really focused on what is your professional role, what is your task. I'm speaking of organizations now. And very importantly, the teacher is the one who is themselves a continuous student, the one who continues to learn and grow, and continues to look to develop themselves. Here's some lessons, life lessons from someone sometimes reluctant, sometimes less reluctant leader. Firstly, leading is a position that we take in through the recognition of others. Self-appointed leaders are not welcome anywhere. The leaders recognized by and appointed by their people are championed by their people, are carried by their people, are cared for by their people. Don't be a self-appointed leader. Be one that has been humble, that has been patient, that has been gentle, and that has allowed their skills and their knowledge and their care for people and their vision to let them step to the fore and be recognized. Lesson 2, know yourself. I can almost not overly stress this, is in leadership when we move into areas where we don't know ourselves, where we don't know our true ability, we don't know our own skill, we so quickly find ourselves in a position of deep discomfort and stress. Who are you naturally? Who did God make you to be? What did He place inside of you? And there is a fine balance between humility and self-depreciation. And we need to know our value, but walk in that humbly. You are a precious child of God, made perfectly in His image. And yes, we have fallen, but you know what? He is restoring us. And we need to know that we are princes and princesses in His kingdom, seated in heavenly places with Christ, ruling with Him now here in His kingdom. But we need to hold that lightly and humbly. Lead from calling. Gerard, how do I know whether I'm called? If you're a Christian, you're called. The question is, what are you called to? This isn't a teaching on calling specifically, but if you're finding yourself in leadership positions or feeling yourself drawn to leadership, but you don't quite know what God's calling on your life is, I would really strongly suggest that you pursue that process of discovery. And where should you start? Go to people that you deeply trust, that you know are spiritually mature, that you know actually really do know you, and that you know who have your best interests on their hearts, and go to them. What do you see in me? What if you were to be honest with me, and please be honest with me, what do you see inside of me? What do you think God has placed there? And then be prepared to yourself engage with that and seek to develop it. Seek to grow what God has put in you. He so often plants seeds in us, and He will water them and He will tend them, but we share that responsibility. But lead from what God has placed inside of you. And then very importantly, lead in your own skin. You are you. That's not a mistake. God didn't forget some elements that is required for a leader. He made you to be you. And lead from that. Know yourself and lead from that. We can learn so much from other leaders, but once we try and be like other leaders, at some point that will fail, because that is not who you're made to be. Lead from you. So I would really encourage you to look at these 5 positions that I've described and see where you fit. And it may not be one, it may be a mix of them, but to really try and understand, what does it look like for Gerard to be a leader? Not for Gerard to try and be like someone else. This model that I described speaks of team. I think one of the most important lessons that I learned, and to disclose a little bit, I think initially I was quite an arrogant leader that sort of thought that I could do everything and I could do everything better. But as I got a little bit older and developed some bumps and bruises, one of the greatest lessons that I learned is the value of team and doing things in team. Understanding that I have a certain skill set and having the wisdom of recognizing the skills around me and bringing them in, pulling those in, walking closely with people who have different skill sets, different mindsets, different views of the world than me, actively seeking diversity, especially in leadership teams, that you're sure that your blind spots and your weak spots are well covered. know that you are not the ultimate head. It doesn't matter how senior you get. You never get to be the ultimate head. There is only one, and that is Christ. And that goes for the church, and that goes for every business, non-profit organization, any structure on this earth. There is only one final head. And know your position. It is so freeing to know that there is an ultimate authority over you as a leader. One of the most stressful things as a leader is decision making. This constant pressure to make decision after decision, and the stress and the concern of, am I making the right decisions? Understanding that I'm under Christ means that I can go to Him. Play to your strengths, delegate the rest. And then ask yourself this question. Leaders are supposed to be a gift to the church. They're supposed to be a blessing to the church. Leaders are supposed to be a gift to their organization. They're supposed to be a blessing to their organization. Are you a blessing? Do you actively pursue being a blessing to your people? And you can do that as yourself. You don't have to become somebody else to be a blessing. When you know who you are and you bring you, you will be a blessing. Two more points. The role of a leader is equipping their people, verse 12. We are unable to do everything ourselves. We are not even the best at everything ourselves. In fact, you may be the leader of a significant organization and not be the best at anything in your whole organization. And to give you a tip, if you're a young leader, look for people who are better than you. Employ people who are better than you. They will not make you look bad. They will make you shine. And you will have the opportunity to grow and make them shine. Our role as a leader is to make our people flourish, to make our people do what they're supposed to do to the best of their ability. We need to understand that our primary role is serving them, that they can do the real thing that needs to get done. My last point on this model is this understanding that we've never arrived, that we keep pursuing maturity, we keep growing, verse 13 and onwards. As a leader, the moment you think that you've arrived is the moment that you've set yourself up for a nice, big, humbling fall. Understand that we remain students ourselves, and that we're to remain teachable. And that you can learn from the youngest, from the most junior. Often you can actually learn from the youngest, the most junior. So let me quickly just pull this together for us and just repeat some of the points that I feel are the really, really core points. Know yourself. Lead as yourself. Lead as who God made you to be. He crafted you perfectly. And be sure that when you lead as you. Lead from calling, and there's the two aspects to that. What did God make for me, and what is God's timing? What's God's purposes? Am I seeking to partner with Him and to be in step with what He is busy doing, or am I busy trying to forge my own way? And from experience of leadership in the corporate sector, in the non-profit sector, I can tell you that being in step with what God is doing is as applicable to those sectors as it is to the church. And in whatever you do, know that there's one head, and that is Christ, and firmly place yourself under Him and under His leadership. He's right there for you. Leadership can be lonely. Even when you have teams, sometimes leadership can be lonely. But knowing that Christ is with you and for you, and that He is the best resource that you will ever have, and that He is on your side, and that He is desiring to lead with you and to lead you as you lead others is the most fundamental foundation for a Christian leader. To end us off, I want to return to this idea of calling. One of the things that is most fulfilling for me as a Christian is this understanding that I fit into a bigger picture and that God has a purpose for my life. It was life-changing for me to be able to step into things, and specifically work is the main thing we do with our lives, to step into a space where I know what I'm doing every day of the week is in line with God's purpose and has such a bigger meaning